realisateur. A Trap for Cinderella.
Goedenavond op het 31ste filmfestival BIFFF. Deze keer in Beaux-Arts. En we hebben vanavond bij ons Ian SOFTLEY, die de meesten onder jullie wel al kennen. We hebben daar net in wereldpremière zijn nieuwe film Trap for Cinderella gezien. First off, congratulations. Really enjoyed the movie.
Thank you.
I thought there's all the twists and turns that you need in that kind of story. So, is it very alike to the book, your screenplay, or did you do a lot of changes?
There's a lot of changes. The big bones of the story are the same. The scenes where first of all, it takes place in Paris in the 60s, and in the south of France in the 60s also, obviously. The ending is very different. The sort of the denouement. Mickey is a much less sympathetic character, I think, in the book, which is countered by the fact that you have her internal life. She's basically a criminal. But when I spoke to Japrisot, he said that he was in love with the character, and that I saw it in many ways as a sort of companion piece to a film I did many years ago called Wings of the Dove, where there's also a sort of a plot where people are obsessed with each other, fall in love with each other, and in some way duplicitous. And underlying it all is the theory that somebody else's life is going to bring you happiness. Or that you can somehow exchange your life for somebody else's and become happy. So I use that as the template. I also, as I said in the introduction, I was inspired in terms of the character of Mickey by a couple of people that I knew that tragically passed away. I think the setup of the first act was quite different as well. In the book, I think it's all a flashback from Mickey as a prisoner, and both Jeanne and Mickey get arrested and go to prison, and the device by which she realizes that she's Mickey is she smells a perfume which is called Trap for Cinderella on a guard, and she remembers that when she was a child in Algeria she smelt this perfume, and obviously I thought that a smell was difficult to communicate in the cinema. And I was rather surprised, actually, because there is in the book this idea of Doe not being able to swim, but it sort of dropped, and I thought that could be the final evidence for her, plus the whole image of drowning and memory being under the water, being somehow in oblivion. And it's also a plot point, which is the incident at the beginning of the two girls.
You didn't try to script yourself. Were you involved in the transition from the novel to the script?
I did write it myself.
You did write the script yourself?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you involved in communicating a lot with the actual author? And you told us that you did communicate with him. He told you about the character, etc. So was he okay with all of the changes you wanted to make?
Well, I first came across this book many years ago, and it was always the film that I was going to do before, after the film that I was completing, and it just never happened. And it was all. And when I finished Inkheart, I said to myself, "There's two things I've wanted to do for the last 10 years." And I'm just going to do them, no matter how difficult, no matter how long it takes. And the first was to put my first film Backbeat on the stage, which I managed to do. I created a show at Glasgow, which has subsequently gone to London and Toronto and Los Angeles. And the other thing was to make this film. But actually what I felt, I realized part of the reason why I didn't jump in was I was kind of searching for what the film was about. And it really is about, in the character of Mickey, somebody who is inevitably moving towards the abyss, somebody who's attractive because they are skating so close to the edge, but what saves her life is the attempted murder and the amnesia, because it allows her to step outside and examine herself and choose life as opposed to choosing death, which is the path that she was on. And that sort of came to me partly because of the experience of my friends that died, and how everybody was so shocked because they were the people that everybody wanted to be. the most attractive, the most people with the most lovers, the most stylish, the most creative. So early on, to get back to your question, I met Jacques Prisot, and he had, I think, optioned this book to Kubrick years ago. And I got the impression he wasn't that keen on it being made into a film, because the first time it was very unsuccessful, and he wrote the screenplay and said it was a very, very difficult screenplay to write. But then he sadly died as well, probably, I think, in about 2004. So it was subsequent to that I really had the I had the breakthrough in terms of writing the script.
Well, in this sort of film, especially in Trap for Cinderella, although it's all twists and turns and it's a thriller in conception, what I really enjoyed about it is the characters, because one of them is like a Weasley little scared girl who takes advantage of something, and the other one is very self-secure. But then in the end, I basically got more and more involved with these two characters. So it mustn't been that easy to make those characters likable to the audience.
Well, the two things that I had quite a lot of difficulty getting the film funded, because people didn't know what category to put it in. They said, it's not really a thriller in the way that we consider a thriller today, which has a much higher body count, and it wasn't a kind of romance, so that they were very confused. And I always knew that, because I had this criticism of the script of Wings of the Dove, that the character that was ultimately played by Helena Bonham Carter was very unsympathetic. And I said, I kept saying to Harvey Weinstein, you'll like her, because she's kind of breaking the rules, and she's sexy because she's got a dark side. Those are the people that we like, and are sort of, and find interesting. Because they are struggling themselves. So I always felt confident that once I cast the right girls. Early on, I cast a couple of unknown actresses that nobody wanted to fund, Jessica Chastain and Gemma Arterton. And they stayed with me for about a year and a half. And then they went on to
do small movies.
To a couple of small movies, yeah. And I had a couple of other actresses. Then I went to Lionsgate UK, who were sort of buying the UK rights, and I said, look, because there was a number of other actresses, like Felicity Jones, I can't remember how many, I saw about 20, all of whom have got quite big careers now. And I said, why don't you just let me find 2 new actresses? And I did a series of auditions, mixing and matching, and I had Tuppence playing Doe with other people, and I knew that the important thing about film is that you have to be attracted to and sympathise with the character when you've been in their company for 100 minutes. And so I knew that it wasn't just a single audition that was important. And I spent 4 or 5 sessions with Tuppence and Alex in combinations with other people. And they just emerged. The more time I spent with them, the more fascinated I was with them. And they weren't necessarily the most virtuoso performers. And it was very exciting, because it was I mean, Alex had a role playing the young Margaret Thatcher in The Iron Lady, which is a very small role, and Tuppence had done really, really small films, 2 small films, and just been out of drama school for a year. But now both of them have very, very sort of very healthy careers. Tuppence has just been cast by the Wachowskis in Hercules, Jupiter Rising, and Alex is playing opposite James Corden in a Weinstein film where she's actually the female lead. So,
was physical likeness a concern at all? Obviously, Doe has to be able to pass for Mickey and the other way around. Yeah. So, was it something you needed to look for as well?
I was sort of aware of that. In a way, I felt quite early on that you were creating a frame as a filmmaker, and a world and a journey that you had to be confident that the audience would want to be taken by you, and that was an absolute principle of mine at the beginning. That if you tell somebody something convincingly enough, and they're convinced by the performance, then they'll believe it. They'll believe even extraordinary things, I remember seeing a very bold film called Suture. I don't know whether you saw that film, where there was a black and white film with two brothers, and there was some plastic surgery. I think one was made to look like the other, and one brother was played by a black man and the other by a white man, and it kind of worked. You sort of just bought the conceit of it. So that was a kind of, I had that in the back of my mind. There's two things. You're talking about the sympathy, and you're talking about the appearance. The two things that finance has always said is that, you know, we like everything about it, but you'll never get Mickey sympathetic, and you'll never get people to believe that one character has become another character. And, you know, our experience so far is we really haven't had anybody who didn't believe it, and unless I suppose they're told it before they see the film, which is going to be the problem with trailers. So I had that kind of confidence. I did then want to have them kind of the same height. And when I started to get into doing makeup, I did start to concentrate more a little bit on things like the distance of the eyes and the rest of it. And I was really surprised when my DP said, you know, their faces are really similar. I said, I don't think they are at all. He said, they are, look, I'll show you. And he superimposed them. And that was the idea for that shot in the mirror, where we actually superimposed the two. That even though it looks as though their faces are very different, the kind of innate structure of it is very similar, which I think was kind of very convenient.
Obviously, you did some big budget films like Ink Heart, The Skeleton Key, etc. This film feels a lot more personal, considering that you had friends die and that inspired some of the stuff you did in the film. How personal was it, and was it a very different experience for you to film a feature such as this one?
Yeah, it was completely different. It was almost like making a first film. It was, and I sort of, I think I've learned a lot of lessons from it. If I was to do a similar project again, I would do certain things differently. We had very little time, considering we had to travel, and we had to blow up a house, and we had to do some underwater stuff. We had 5 weeks to shoot it. I shot it on Super 16, which I'm very pleased with the way that looks, and that allowed us to work quickly. It also was, I sort of looked at how they made New Wave films, the Nouvelle Vague films, and they would find a friend with a house or a friend of a friend, and they would go and stay there. And when we were doing the budget, the producers were saying, well, look, this is how much it's going to cost. We can only go into France for 2 days. And I said, well, 40% of the script is in France. We can't just go for 2 days. They said, how are we going to do it? I said, well, we'll find somebody. And we found a friend of a friend who had that house. And a lot of us stayed there. And we said to them, look, will you do the cooking for us? And they said, yeah, we'll do the cooking.
So they cooked all the house you actually grew up, right?
No. And they did all the cooking. So it was, that side of it was great. There's a kind of intimacy. I'd written the script. I was able to kind of to change things. There was, I had total creative control, and I had two great producers working with me who were completely happy, for me to work that way. It was all very intense because the money came together quite quickly, and I was having to rewrite in order to fit it to a smaller budget. So there were moments, and we did 30 setups a day. There were some times we went into a day knowing that we would only make the day if we did 2 or 3 takes. So it was a kind of, it felt as though we were on one level skating on quite thin ice because we had no room for error. But that kind of created an energy that was quite thrilling at the same time, I think.
Well, you mentioned it now, Nouvelle Vague, and that's not really that I want to talk about Nouvelle Vague, but if someone would have asked me if what would I compare the film to, or what's it like, film it kind of reminded me of is, in a certain sense, obviously talented Mr. Ripley, Highsmith, but then the French version, Plein Soleil, which was that
I like Plein Soleil, but I wasn't really trying to make it, and I don't try and do that. I think that I'm inspired by my own photographs, by going to the places, by sometimes stills photographs, quite a lot. Other films, I think that can really get in the way. But what I wanted to do on one level was to make a film that there were elements of it that were an homage to the New Wave, because the book was written in the 60s, and Jacques Rizzo actually wrote the scenarios to a couple of really great 60s films like L'été meurtrier with Ajani. So I wanted that reference, and I actually watched quite a lot of new wave films, just generally just to kind of for the fluidity. But I also wanted it to feel very contemporary. I wanted it to have the feel of the streets of Hoxton and the East End of London. And we actually, we didn't block any streets. We went into real clubs. We were outside real clubs. We intentionally chose the days, like a Thursday night, when there would be most people around. And that was, and our office was right, above a club as well. So I wanted it to have that combination of like almost like a new wave film, but now.
The images felt very naturalistic oftentimes. For example, there's a scene where they're walking on the pavement and there's still water on the pavement because it rained before. Usually they don't do that. Yeah. So was that a very deliberate decision as well, or was it because of the fact that you didn't have many days to shoot? And
no, well, I think a lot of the I think a lot of the scenes in France actually, the composition and things was very intentional. I mean, and it was partly because of those scenes I put in the film because I saw them in my head. Either because I'd been there, like the thing on the top of the mountain. I nearly drove off a mountain when in the Massif Central when I was 18 in a deux chevaux. I pulled off the road with a friend and bumped, and woke up in the morning with a goat looking in and realizing I was about 4 feet from death. So there were a lot of things where the composition was very deliberate. But then when we went onto the streets, particularly of London, we were just gonna let it happen. Yeah.
Flashbacking to your career and also in this conversation, actually, when you mentioned Wings of the Dove and the characters in this movie, because they're on paper maybe not the most sympathetic characters. Your first film, Backbeat, Stuart Sutcliffe doesn't come over as the most sympathetic character either. So what was the intention on that film? Didn't you ever think of doing a Paul McCartney film or a John Lennon film? So why a Stuart Sutcliffe film?
Well, I wouldn't have thought of doing a Paul McCartney film. Although I'm an admirer of him musically, I don't think the story is very, very interesting. And the inspiration for doing Backbeat was not to do a Beatles story at all. In fact, when I was growing up, I wouldn't have said that I was primarily a Beatles fan. Of course, subsequently, I realized the influence that they're always there in the background. I saw photographs of Stuart and Astrid, these two gorgeous-looking people who I think I was, I don't know, 24 when I first saw those photographs. And I was looking to make a kind of rock and roll love story, maybe a rites of passage story. And I loved the kind of the androgyny where they were like mirror images of each other. And I became fascinated by those two characters. And kind of when you add, as a third character, John Lennon, who's one of the most powerful kind of cultural figures of the 60s, I thought that was a kind of quite an incendiary combination.
And as I understand it, Astrid Kircher, that's her name,
Kircher.
Right? Kircher, yeah. She cooperated a lot on the film, I think. Didn't
she got what, sorry?
Didn't she cooperate a lot on
the film? She did, yeah. Well, I had to go and meet Astrid. I first of all got her details via Stuart Sutcliffe's mother when she was alive, and he gave me her address in she gave me her address in Hamburg and a number, and I called her up and said, look, I'm doing this film. And she was very anti the idea because she felt that both her story and Stuart's story were just used as a couple of paragraphs in Beatles biographies. And so she said, look, when you're next if you ever come to Hamburg, then look me up. And I went the next week and looked her up again, and she checked me out, and time went on, and we contracted her, and I did a series of interviews with her and Klaus Vormann, who she introduced me to. I stayed with them for a week and taped those interviews, and that became the kind of the transcripts that I adapted into, that was the basis of the screenplay, but also kind of a great legal security, because it meant that they were eyewitnesses to everything that the story was about. And the fact that they were signing off on a written account was very useful. But then she's still a friend of mine now. She came, she sort of gave her approval to the play. She came to the premiere of the play in London. So yeah, it was inspiring to be able to work with her.
Before going to the questions in the audience. getting back to sympathetic characters, I fully agree that you have to care about the characters. Do you think that in Great Britain, especially in the UK, and maybe in Europe, it's easier to get away with characters being less sympathetic than, for example, in the US? I'm thinking of, for example, TV or film remakes where the American version features more sympathetic characters than the British version does. Yeah. It seems to be like something that happens quite a lot. So do you feel like it's easier to get away with characters maybe not being that likable all the time?
Completely. Yeah, I think that there's, particularly in the studio system, there's, you know, they would say, oh, it can't be down. You know, it's got to be up, and everybody's got to be likable in a rather predictable way. I think that there's a kind of I was talking about this with members of the jury in the last couple of days. There's a kind of judgmental thing often, I think, in American narrative, whereby if you have a character that does exotic bad things in the first two acts, they have to die or be punished in the third act. Whereas, you know, I think we're much happier to let the baddies get away with it.
Misschien zijn er vragen in het publiek? Il y a des questions dans le public? Everybody's, of course, run off to see Tom Cruise.
Any questions in the audience?
Yes, I noticed that the film was already finished in 2011. Now it's 2013, it's the world premiere. Was there a reason that it took so long before it was distributed?
It wasn't finished in 2000. Where did you get that information?
It's on the internet.
I saw
it.
No,
Is that what IMDb says?
At the end of the credits of the film.
Some sites do say it.
Oh, okay. Well, no, the film wasn't actually finished until sort of about a year ago. But even so, it's a long time. It's part of the problem with a film like this is they gave it because American studios are more and more doing tentpole franchise films. So independent films, there are many more independent films. Somebody was telling me that Backbeat was in Sundance, and I think there's 10 times as many films that are submitted to Sundance as there were when Backbeat was submitted. I was offered a slot last autumn, but it was too short notice, and I don't particularly want to be quoted on this, but let's say there is a school of thought that says it might not be a bad idea to wait until the profiles of the two actors are a little bit higher, because they are going up all the time. And I can certainly see the benefit of that argument. Yeah, I think that it's important to... I think everybody's waiting for the UK release. Lionsgate, when we did the deal with them, said, look, it's not going to come out in 2012. Is that okay? And they actually turned down funding a lot of films because they merged with Summit, so they just had no weekends left. And they said, are you okay with it not coming out in 2012? And we said, yeah, of course we're okay with that. And there are a number of other films. There was a film that I saw last week, which in English is called The Late Quartet. And that was shot, I think, a year before Trap Cinderella. So that there are many more films that you'll see that are coming out, particularly independent films, because people are waiting for the right moment.
Or they need to find distributors.
Yeah.
And also Anur and Bernard, who's in there, who's becoming every day. Anur and Bernard.
Yes, he's
becoming bigger and bigger every day.
Absolutely,
so.
yeah.
Something I wanted to ask you is, because you've worked with them numerous times now, with the Weinsteins. Yeah. So how was that? Because we hear all sorts of stuff about the Weinsteins.
Well, I think that...
How was it for you?
Well, I think in the fullness of time, you just look at what they bring. Once they get behind a film, then your film has a better chance or as good a chance of success as any others. They're very, and again, their role is becoming more important than people like them, where you have people that have influence in casting. They're becoming more important because the sort of films that Hollywood would call dramas are not being made in very great numbers by the studios. So the agents are nervous about committing to independent films. and what they want is they want to have a heavyweight producer, you know, whether it's a Brian Glazer or a Harvey Weinstein, or a working title. And it's very difficult unless you go in advance with a producer like that to actually get the cast. So that's an evasive answer to your question, partly intentionally. Yeah, I think that, I mean, I had some very robust arguments with Harvey, and he would admit that. But you know, I think and he would say this. I think the film is pretty close to in terms of Wings of Love, to the film that I wanted to make.
In previous Q&As, we actually had directors here telling us, okay, we wanted to make a drama, but there's not that big a market for dramas, and especially the studios don't want to touch them, so we made a horror instead.
Yeah.
And we still like the horror, but so is that something that you're looking for, right, or that you have to look for or take into consideration when you're making a film?
Skeleton Key was kind of a genre like that, but you're absolutely right in terms of filmmaking. And one of the things that was exciting about Skeleton Key was that there's so much that you're telling the story with the camera so much. As opposed to with so much, you know, less dialogue, more camera movement, more cinema, really. And that was one of the things I enjoyed about the Skeleton Key. And I'm always open to genre films. In fact, a good friend of mine, Jason Blum, is the producer of Paranormal Activity, and he has a whole strand of films. He's actually just offered me one, very, very low budget. And I think that it's one of the things that's been exciting about this festival, is that what one is looking at is they are real filmmaker films. They're not films by committee.
Some of them are, most aren't.
Yes.
Any more questions in the audience? Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? No one?
Yeah, well,
Going once? Okay.
I understand.
Hello? So the film is named after the perfume. The book is named after the perfume.
Well, that's a kind of it's sort of the other way round. The perfume is named after the fact that you could say that Doe is a Cinderella character, and that a trap is set for her. So I wouldn't say the book's named after the perfume. I'd say the perfume, the name of the perfume is named after the name of the book, if you like.
Yeah, because I think there are a lot of similarities between the film's character and Cinderella.
Yes.
So, I mean, my question is: was it really the meaning of the film, the name? Or was it just for the perfume?
No, it wasn't to do with the perfume at all. I mean, I don't think the perfume exists, but it was partly to. We'd thought long and hard about changing the title, and the title, we never really found anything better, and the title kind of stuck. And it is, as you say, it's sort of what it's about. It's a trap for a Cinderella character.
It made sense.
It made total sense. Yeah. So what's next for you? Concretely, what is your next project?
Well, I'm always superstitious about talking about the next project. But there's a couple of the things. I'm working on a version of Ivanhoe, which will make reference to the current Middle Eastern wars, even though it'll be set in the medieval times. I'm working on a Ron Rash adaptation. I think Suzanne Bier has just done a Ron Rash film with Jennifer Lawrence, and I've got a kind of weird David Lynch-esque film, but I think Ivanhoe is the one that is at the top of the pile at the moment.
When you're saying working on, do you mean that as a scriptwriter or as a director?
Yeah, no, there's a script. I know as a director, but I was working closely on the script, but I'm director on all those projects. I'm director. Yeah.
And we'll get back to this later in the week because you're on jury duty now.
Yeah.
So how's that going so far?
Always very enjoyable. Fabulous jury members in the audience here. Roland, Marina and Frederic. And it's very stimulating, not just seeing the films, but also having the chance to spend so much time with fellow filmmakers and discuss what one, in the kind of serious environment, serious in the sense of not talking about commerciality or money or waiting for agents to call you back, but actually talking about the work is always very refreshing and kind of stimulating.
We have a tradition here at the BIFF that Thierry always gets to ask the last question, mainly because we're very afraid of him. We kind of think he might kill us in many very creative ways, because he's a BIFF fan.
Dinosaur.
There you go. So Thierry, I would suggest you ask question today.
The final traditional question to our guests is the dream project. Unlimited funds, unlimited means, could be a book adaptation, could be one of your own scripts. If you could cast anyone you want, what would you do?
Oh my God, what a great question. I wish I'd had that beforehand, because there's probably 2 or 3 that I would have to choose between. But I can't actually answer right now, really.
Maybe Thursday then.
Maybe Thursday. Yeah, I'll work on it.
Sleep on it.
Yeah. Because I wouldn't want to. It's such a great, it's such a tantalizing opportunity. I wouldn't want to throw it away.
Ian, thanks for being here, and
Pleasure.
you guys as well. A petit round of applause. That's
round of
English and
applause
French
for
together.
Ian
Alors, un petit
Softley.
applaus pour Ian Softley.
Thank you.
Merci tous iedereen.
Okay. Have you taken one?
You speak to any time, don't worry. I understand what it means for both, also.
Again, so here's the book of the day. It's Lovecraft. Lovecraft, the book and the Chronicler, so you write a few words on it. And your colleague will write later on when we have the Q&A together for the jury.
Cool.
His name Jordan. I don't know, I can't understand it.
Back after 12 years.
12 years. Yeah.
Keep it.
Keep it. Do it. Look up. Ça c'est là, ça aussi.
You want an inspiration, you need an
I'm just
inspiration.
thinking, I was thinking how I should spell Freddie's name.
Freddie? How would you
Freddie, how
spell
do you spell your name?
Huh?
Il y a plus belle. Hein? Un jour ou l'autre, je te bute contre l'exorcisme.
Ah, c'est chouette, on va pouvoir refaire un film.
Oui, finalement.
La porte est à poil.
So this is official serigraphy of the festival.
Oh wow.
Yes. And it's signed by artist himself.
Oh my God, that's
the guys. And you lucky number 51 on 150 print. Yes.
Oh, wow.
It's a kind of collector.
Yeah, how fantastic. Oh, that's so
Oh,
great.
yes, you do it.
Yeah,
Make a
I'll
frame.
frame that.
Yeah,
That's
it's a
really
nice
great
frame.
thing, it is, yeah.
It's a great collector.
Sorry, can you
Yeah.
on the line?
Glad you like it.
Yeah.